The disturbing case of Elisa Lam. What really happened in the Cecil Hotel? The image flickers, a time-stamped digital ghost. February 1, 2013. A young woman, Elisa Lam, steps into an elevator within the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Her movements are disjointed, a sequence of nervous energy and inexplicable caution. She presses multiple floor buttons, peering out into the vacant corridor, her body language shifting from tentative to agitated. She withdraws, seemingly hiding, then reemerges, gesturing as if in an unheard conversation with someone unseen. The elevator doors, inexplicably, remain open. This grainy surveillance footage, released weeks later by the Lapped, would become the indelible, chilling prelude to one of the most unsettling disappearances in recent memory. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Canadian student, bright and full of wanderlust, on a solo journey down the American West Coast. Her trip, a personal odyssey of self-discovery, had brought her to Los Angeles and to the Cecil, a hotel whose grandeur had long faded, replaced by a grim notoriety. For decades, the Cecil Hotel had been a magnet for despair and depravity. Its walls had witnessed suicides, hosted serial killers like Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger, and accumulated a dark legacy that seeped into its very foundations. It was a place where stories ended, often abruptly and violently, leaving behind only echoes and unanswered questions. It was within these shadowed confines that Elisa Lam performed her final, perplexing dance for an unblinking camera. Her subsequent disappearance, the frantic search, and the horrifying discovery of her body, naked and bloated, at the bottom of a sealed rooftop water tank, coalesced into a modern urban legend. How did she get there? Why the bizarre behavior? Was she alone? The questions spiraled, fueled by the hotel's macabre past and the footage's haunting ambiguity. This account endeavors to navigate the known facts of Elisa Lam's case, to dissect the unsettling elevator footage, to examine the official conclusions drawn by authorities, and to explore the persistent, often disturbing theories that continue to haunt this tragedy, refusing to let it settle into the realm of the simply explained. Elisa Lam was more than a figure in a viral video. She was a young woman with a future, a history. Her aspirations were typical of someone her age, but her journey was also punctuated by documented struggles. She lived with bipolar disorder, a condition that shaped her perceptions and experiences, and for which she took prescribed medication. Her solo trip was a bold undertaking, detailed sporadically on her blog, a digital breadcrumb trail leading from Vancouver to San Diego, then north to Santa Cruz, and finally, Los Angeles. These posts offered glimpses of an individual embracing independence, grappling with internal landscapes, and occasionally reflecting on her mental health. Her arrival at the Cecil Hotel was initially uneventful. She checked in on January 26th, initially assigned to a shared hostel-style room on the 5th floor. However, complaints from her roommates regarding odd behavior led to her being moved to a private room. Her interactions with family, primarily her parents in British Columbia, continued with reasonable regularity until January 31st. That day she contacted them, assuring them of her travel plans. It would be their last conversation. Her interactions with family, primarily her parents in British Columbia, continued with reasonable regularity until January 31st. That day she contacted them, assuring them of her travel plans. It would be their last conversation. February 1st, 2013, arrived, marking Elisa Lam's scheduled checkout from the Cecil Hotel. She failed to appear. She also failed to contact her family, an uncharacteristic lapse that immediately ignited their concern. A pattern of diligent communication had abruptly ceased, and the digital silence was deafening. Her parents, thousands of miles away, promptly alerted the Los Angeles Police Department. The initial investigation was a methodical but ultimately fruitless traversal of the hotel's public spaces. Officers scoured the lobby, the dining areas, the corridors of her assigned floor. Her room yielded no signs of struggle, no note, no indication of her destination or companion. It was as if she had simply evaporated from within the very walls of the Cecil. The hotel, a sprawling edifice of forgotten glamour and concealed rot, offered countless nooks and shadows, but none seemed to hold the answer. As days bled into a week, then a second, the absence of leads became a lead in itself, a chilling void suggesting either an incredibly clean disappearance or an event unfolding within the hotel's less accessible arteries. With conventional investigative avenues exhausted and public interest slowly beginning to flicker, the Lapt made a desperate gambit. On February 13th, almost 2 weeks after Elisa Lam vanished, they released surveillance footage captured by an elevator camera within the Cecil Hotel. It was a stark, grainy black and white recording, timestamped around 1:07 a.m. on February 1st. What it depicted would not only escalate the case into a global phenomenon, but would forever embed itself in the lexicon of internet mysteries, a chilling, inexplicable tableau that defied easy categorization. The 4-minute video opens with Elisa Lam entering the elevator, her demeanor initially appearing normal. She presses a series of buttons, an unremarkable act. Yet the doors do not close. This is the first deviation, subtle but profound. Her behavior then shifts, becoming increasingly erratic, almost frenetic. She steps in and out of the elevator, peering cautiously left, then right, as if scanning for an unseen presence. Her head movements are sharp, her glances darting. She retreats into the elevator, pressing multiple floor buttons again, a repetitive, almost compulsive action. The doors, however, remain stubbornly open. A deeper unease begins to settle over the viewer as Elisa Lam's actions escalate. She steps out once more, placing herself to the right of the elevator entrance, partially obscured by the doorframe. There she begins a series of animated, almost theatrical gestures with her hands, moving them rapidly, palms facing up, then down, her fingers splayed. Her body language suggests a dialogue, yet she is demonstrably alone in the frame. Is she talking to someone, pleading, arguing, or perhaps even beckoning? Her movements carry a strange, disjointed rhythm, her gaze fixed on something or someone just out of the camera's view. She sways slightly, her posture conveying a disquieting blend of agitation and apprehension. At one point, she leans forward, peeking further out into the corridor, then withdraws with a visible jerk, as if startled or attempting to conceal herself. Her hands continue their inexplicable dance. After nearly 2 minutes of this bizarre performance, she walks away from the elevator, disappearing off-screen to the left. Only then, with Elisa Lam no longer in its immediate vicinity, do the elevator doors finally, ponderously, close. The silence of the empty corridor, after her agitated presence, is profoundly unsettling. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The footage, disseminated globally across online platforms, became an instant viral sensation. Millions watched, rewatched, and dissected every frame. The cold, mechanical eye of the camera had captured a young woman in an incomprehensible state, alone in a deserted corridor, engaged in a silent, terrifying drama. Theories bloomed like grotesque fungi in the internet's dark corners, Was she high on drugs, experiencing a psychotic break, playing a game, or was she, as many whispered, being pursued? The ambiguity of her actions, combined with the Cecil Hotel's already infamous reputation, fueled a relentless digital obsession that only deepened the mystery surrounding Elisa Lam's fate. The video offered a glimpse, not into answers, but into a precipice of profound, disquieting questions. Days turned into weeks, and the initial surge of global internet sleuths and armchair detectives, despite their prolific theorizing, yielded no concrete leads. The elevator footage, replayed millions of times, dissected frame by frame, offered more questions than answers. The Los Angeles Police Department found themselves no closer to understanding Elisa Lam's final moments, or indeed, her whereabouts. The trail grew cold, or so it seemed, until a different kind of complaint began to filter down to the front desk of the Cecil Hotel. It started subtly, a low hum of discontent among a handful of guests on the upper floors. Complaints about unusually low water pressure, a minor inconvenience in an establishment already known for its eccentricities. Then came the more unsettling observations. The water emerging from taps and shower heads carried an odd, metallic tang and a peculiar, brownish discoloration. For days, hotel staff, accustomed to the Cecil's quirks, dismissed these grievances as isolated incidents, perhaps a localized plumbing issue. Yet the complaints persisted, growing more frequent and more insistent. One guest, a British tourist named Sabrina Baha, described the water as having a funny, sweet but disgusting taste, while others detailed a foul odor, a putrid, almost chemical stench that clung to the steam of their morning showers. The situation became untenable. On February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa Lam was last seen, the growing chorus of protests forced the hotel management to act. A maintenance worker, Santiago Lopez, was dispatched to the rooftop, the logical nexus for the building's water supply. Access to the Cecil Hotel's roof was not straightforward. A locked door, often requiring a key and an alarm bypass, guarded the stairwell leading up. Further security measures included a fire escape, equally requiring an alarm deactivation. However, investigations would later reveal that one of the fire escape doors had been propped open, or otherwise made accessible, around the time of Elisa's disappearance. The roof itself was a utilitarian landscape of ducts, vents, and 4 massive cylindrical water tanks. These tanks, each approximately 10 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, supplied the entire hotel with water for drinking, bathing, and sanitation. Lopez, accustomed to the mundane tasks of his role, began his inspection. He noted nothing immediately amiss with the labyrinth of pipes, but the persistent complaints about the water's quality spurred him to check the tanks themselves. He approached the closest tank, its rusted metal shimmering under the Los Angeles sun. A heavy, bolted lid, designed to prevent contamination and unauthorized access, sealed its opening. Lifting such a lid, even for a seasoned maintenance worker, required effort. It was a cumbersome, two-handed task. As Lopez finally managed to heave the lid open, the stench that erupted from within was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly revolting. It was a smell that transcended mere decay, thick with a putrid sweetness that clutched at the throat and burned the nostrils. Peering into the dark water, Lopez initially saw nothing but the murky surface. But then, as his eyes adjusted and the faint light pierced the depths, a shape materialized. It was large, indistinct at first, then chillingly clear. Floating face up, amidst the putrid water that hotel guests had been consuming, brushing their teeth with, and showering in for weeks, was the naked body of a young woman. Her skin was discolored, bloated, and grotesque, a silent, macabre figure suspended in the hotel's lifeblood. The horrifying discovery sent a shockwave through the Cecil Hotel, and once again, across the globe. It was Elisa Lam. The immediate questions that followed were staggering in their impossibility. How had she gotten into the tank? The roof was restricted, the tank lids heavy and bolted. How had a young woman, reportedly struggling with mental health issues, managed to ascend to the rooftop, bypass security, and then, inexplicably, get inside one of the massive water cisterns, which stood several feet off the ground without a ladder, without assistance, and without leaving any trace of a struggle or forced entry? The answers, even for seasoned investigators, seemed to recede further into the murk, just like the grim discovery itself. The known facts now included a body, but the path to that horrifying endpoint remained shrouded in a sinister, incomprehensible fog. The incomprehensible fog, which had for weeks shrouded the disappearance of Elisa Lam, began to coalesce not with a flash of insight, but with a trickle of an unspeakable truth. It began in the mundane, in the hotel's taps and shower heads, where guests started to notice something profoundly amiss. The complaints trickled in first, isolated and individual, easily dismissed by the overwhelmed front desk. A faint metallic tang to the water. A curious, almost earthy discoloration in the bathwater. Then the complaints became a chorus. The water pressure, once robust, now barely a reluctant dribble. Showers became an ordeal of tepid, murky fluid. The taste, once merely unpleasant, grew distinctly foul, a sickening sweetness that lingered on the palate. Guests, some checking in with weary resignation to the Cecil's notorious eccentricities, others expressing genuine disgust, reported a smell that was difficult to pinpoint yet universally repulsive, an aroma of decomposition, subtle at first, then undeniable, clinging to towels and permeating the very air of their rooms. One guest, accustomed to the vagaries of travel, described brushing his teeth with what he eventually realized was an unspeakable concoction, the taste prompting a sudden, violent nausea. By February 19, 2013, the volume and severity of the complaints could no longer be ignored. The hotel management, facing a growing wave of outrage and the threat of mass checkouts, dispatched Santiago Lopez, a seasoned maintenance worker, to investigate the source of the problem. His task, seemingly routine, was to inspect the 4 large, cylindrical water cisterns situated on the hotel's rooftop. These immense containers, each over 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, supplied the entire hotel with water. Access to the roof itself was restricted, requiring a key and often bypassed by an emergency fire escape ladder that could only be activated from the inside. Lopez ascended to the roof, a familiar, windswept expanse that usually offered a panoramic, if gritty, view of downtown Los Angeles. Today, however, a different sensation gripped him. The air, despite the open sky, carried a heavy, sickly sweetness. He approached the water tanks, noting their formidable presence, anchored firmly to their concrete bases, their metal lids, heavy and unwieldy, designed to keep out contaminants and discourage tampering. As he began his inspection, checking water levels, his gaze fell upon the lid of the 4th tank. It was ajar, partially open, an anomaly he instantly recognized. A wave of dread, cold and immediate, washed over him. He climbed a nearby ladder, hoisting himself higher to peer into the gaping maw of the tank. The sight that greeted him was beyond anything he could have anticipated. Amidst the murky, brown water, bloated and distended, was the body of a young woman. She floated face up, a silent, grotesque sentinel in the hotel's water supply, her presence an abomination that spoke of a nightmare made horrifyingly real. The grim discovery sent a jolt of ice through the Cecil Hotel, transforming a missing persons case into a macabre spectacle. The immediate questions that followed the initial shock were as stark as they were perplexing. How had she, Elisa Lamb, a young tourist, gained access to the highly restricted rooftop? How had she, unaided, managed to lift the heavy, bolted lid of the water tank? And most chillingly, how had she entered the tank itself, several feet off the ground without a ladder, without assistance, and without leaving any trace of a struggle or forced entry? The answers, even for seasoned investigators, seemed to recede further into the murk, just like the grim discovery itself. The known facts now included a body, but the path to that horrifying endpoint remained shrouded in a sinister, incomprehensible fog, forcing a new, more terrifying confrontation with the unknown.